Welcome back to the Sports Business Leaders Podcast. Today we're joined by Chris Wilkerson. Thanks for joining the show, Chris.
Yeah, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Chris Wilkerson played college football at Stephen F. Austin before making it to the NFL with the 49ers and the Titans. And after his playing career, he returned to the sports business world where Chris founded and exited two companies. Today, he leads 51 Ventures, which is an early stage firm backing founders in sports tech, health, performance, and consumer brands, with a portfolio that already includes Vocal, which are good friends of ours. We played sports, SportFX.ai, and a stake in the Aston Martin F1 team. So, Chris, before we get into 51 Ventures, give us more of your story from playing at Stephen F. Austin to making to the NFL and all while building and exiting companies and thinking about the future. We'd love to hear just more about yourself and background.
Yeah. Thanks, Justin. It's always interesting. I try to figure out the best way to tell the story because I feel like there's been so much that's happened in, a 10 to 12 year span of mine, which is fun. But so when I ended up I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to play football at Stephen F. Austin. I was a long snapper. If you're a long snapper, that's a good way to get to college for sure. So was fortunate enough to get that, and when I got to school, I always jokingly tell everybody I came from the opposite of money, pre-NIL, which means no money, and I had to figure out a way to still make money. So, what I did was I ended up teaching myself how to code and build websites and apps and so on and so forth, and that turned from freelance to agency over 5 years, and it was really cool just to experience a, trying to run a business itself while playing was a whole thing of its own, but then starting to understand the startup ecosystem, that was like my first introduction to early stage companies, where I understood the pain points of what they were trying to go through and how they were building a product, what they were trying to do as far as like gaining market traction and really kind of got my feet wet with that. So I felt like that was a really big learning curve that I don't think about all the time, but I got introduced to hundreds and hundreds of startups and different companies at different stages in their life. So that was really cool. Going into my senior year, I'd met with 30 with the 32 NFL teams, knew there was an opportunity for me to go play at the next level, and it just kind of became real. So I ended up exiting that company, selling it to another agency that was much larger than us. And got fortunate enough, worked out with teams, fortunate enough to land in San Francisco that first year, and that was a learning experience, is probably an understatement. I think anybody that's been through the active roster, practice squad, futures contract, active roster, cut to futures contract, it becomes this whole thing, and I think that's the part that, not a lot of people talk about. Like, everybody talks about like, "Oh, you made the team," and it's like, "Well, yeah, I did," and then it was like this, and it was never like a one-to-one direct point. It was never super solidified. I wasn't Tom Brady, right? And so kind of bounced around for a few years with that between those 2 teams, worked out for a lot of teams, and after 2021, when I got cut in Tennessee, finally, I was done. I kinda was like, "All right, I kinda wanna go start my own company." I built a lot of product for a lot of other companies. I've been involved in some other things. I feel like I'm gonna go build my own, and so that was Sideline, and that was a recruiting automation software outreach for collegiate coach to high school athlete, and we solved a problem, a pain point that was there for them, and I thought we did a really good job. We ended up in over 800 universities over 4 years, ended up fortunate enough to sell that company. One of the things that I learned along that line was along those 4 or 5 years was you couldn't you couldn't fake a relationship, right? And like relationships in this game meant a whole lot. And as we all know in sports, like relationships are massive entry point. And no matter what money I went out and raised, no matter what advisors I went out and got, I always felt like I was just beating my head against the wall trying to like get into places, trying to figure out every way to create a new relationship, to create new sales, to create new go to market, to create new this, right? Do everything the right way. And fortunately for me, during that, we had a good product, we had a good team, and I created a lot of really good relationships that I wanted to then, after I sold that, I was like, "Hey, what if I use these relationships and some of these next endeavors with me and helped other people that were kind of in my spot at one point in time?" And so that was where 51 kind of in lieu came from.
Yeah, it's so cool, Chris. And I hear about people like yourself that have started businesses while they're in college. One person that comes to mind is Sean Clifford. He started a company called Limitless NIL while he was at Penn State. So it's cool, and congrats on everything. I think, it's one thing to be able to talk about building a business, but another thing to actually have done it and gone from the life cycle of starting it and then building it and selling it. So, congratulations. And it's also cool. I didn't know about Sideline growing to 800 universities. So, really, really impressive.
Yeah, no, that was that I mean, that was a I hinge a lot on the 4 or 5 years that I spent doing that just because you can't replace what we did, so, it was a unique experience for sure.
Yeah, definitely have a lot of respect. While I was a senior at Gettysburg College, tried to get to that level. We only got to about 40 to 50 universities with my previous startup that I was doing before SBL. But anyways, Chris, this is great. Just to dive into the first planned question here. So, would love to hear more about 51 Ventures, the thesis, the focus, and where you're playing at in the market. And so, as we've kind of alluded to, you've built portfolio art of about 10 companies, including our friends at Vocal. And you're the first investor we know at an ownership team with an F1 team. So yeah, would love to hear more about 51 Ventures and what kind of founders and opportunities you're looking for.
Yeah, so I think I'll talk kind of, like, to our thesis a little bit, and it's kind of almost like the walk of life that I have where so I talk about the core ecosystem of the pro athlete, high performing athlete, and the everyday athlete, and then there's ecosystem in the middle and the product overlap because the high performing athlete may be performing on the court, the field, whatever it is. The everyday athlete is performing in the gym and in their everyday life. But also what they are is they're the fan, right? And so they have that overlap into the high performing athlete as well. There's a core ecosystem of products, whether it's eat better, sleep better, train better, recover better, understand your data better. Those ecosystem of products is where we like to invest, where they overlap each other. I think that's kind of the unique positioning that we try to take. And a lot of that hinges around, again, just from like past experience. I like to look at things from an initial B2B side that then have a broader B2C application, right? I think Whoop is a really good example where they started on pro athlete risks and it was predominantly that because why would anybody else want to understand their data, how they're sleeping and recovering, their HRV in this deep, deep detail? Why would anybody else want to do that except for a pro athlete? But then all of a sudden, the health trend comes in, and now the everyday athlete wants to start understanding those metrics as well. And that's where I see like, hey, B2B from selling to a team league level, the pro athlete level, to then the broader consumer market catching wind of this and starting to propel it from there. So I think that's a really good example as to like where we like to focus. With the access, I think we've created unique access. One of the ways that we did that was, for example, investing into Aston Martin. We're looking at other teams as well where we can create unique access plays for the products that we invest in because there's value to access, right? And I think that's one of the things that gets probably not discussed enough from an investment side is like, hey, you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have access to certain things, you can't get through that pre-seed to Series A hump. That's the hardest part for an early stage company to get past this point. And we have to, as an investor, we have to look at it and say, how do we de-risk that position? And it's with unique access, unique opportunities, whether it's a pilot, the first customer, like getting those companies over those humps to help them get to that point where, hey, they can go raise whatever Series B they want. They can go past that point, is our goal.
Yeah, it's definitely a unique way to go about it. And first, that's something that I've never actually heard about from another venture fund like yourself. So that's it makes a lot of sense with how you talk about creating a unique access to the products that you invest in. And it also makes a lot of sense that Vocal was of interest to you with that overlap between the high performing athlete and the fan or the everyday athlete.
Totally.
So appreciate that, Chris. And just going here to the next question, as we've talked about, so you played in the NFL and you have a ownership in a professional team through your F1 stake, and you're investing in companies like Vocal, and it's definitely something that's very unique. Where I'm not sure you there's other people that have the similar backgrounds as you. From that vantage point, specifically around innovation to teams and leagues, what do you need to see from a team for you to think that they're on the right track?
Good question. First of all, I think I've been very fortunate to kind of, fall into some of the lays of the land from being an entrepreneur to landing as, in the NFL for a few years and getting to do this part of it. So I think I've been, again, lucky in that position, and there's not a lot of, I wouldn't say there was a ton of VCs that have taken this exact route that have been blessed to do so. So I do think that's a unique spot, which kind of leaves us with a unique thesis for that purpose. And I think when you look at, a founder that wants to operate in this space, one of the things I have to look at is I'm going to have the founder that can figure out and solve every problem that comes up and has the utmost certainty to say, this is my decision. I'm going to take it this route because you don't have time to try and decide between two different things, right? I don't have 6 months in this space to be able to say, well, we'll see if this hire works out, right? Because by the time that hire doesn't work out and you haven't gotten rid of that hire, you already failed, right? You've burned through runway that's very important. Or, hey, we're going to try to sell this product, but we really don't think this is the product and we're trying to build out this product needs to get built out now and moved over into production today, right? I mean, it needs to move today, not needs to move in 3 months or 6 months. You can't move in this space that way, especially in sports. Sports changes every day. We're getting all kinds of regulations. We're getting all kinds of new products that enter the space. You have to move today. And so when I look at a founder, I have to find somebody that can move today, not that's just moving for tomorrow. Granted, yeah, that, we're kind of here to help, like, what does that projection over the next 3 to 7 to 10 years look like? And that's my job to make sure that we're taking some of those patterns and some of those routes that it's like over the longevity piece, yes. But that person as the founder has got to be able to direct today and in this moment and live just like how we live in sports in a game. We have 60 minutes to solve this problem. If the defense can't figure out how to stop the read option in those 4 quarters, they're going to lose, right? And that's the only time they get us to compete in that one event, that one day. They don't get tomorrow to look back and say, oh, we figured out how to solve that problem, right? So I think that's something that I really look for is straight decisiveness, whether it's right or wrong. Let's figure out that right or wrong, and then pivot the next step from there, and then go.
Yeah, and this reminds me a lot about just having the conviction from doing the reps and putting the work in to understand the market, understand what are the real problems, because just to your point, even if you're wrong, at least you'll have an inkling as to what exactly you should do next
Yeah,
if
and I
you've
would
done a
rather
lot of the work.
And I would rather you be wrong today, right? Like if there's 2 decisions we can make and we need to pick one, just make it today. That way tomorrow, if we realize that was the wrong decision, we can at least go back to the next one and start over, right? Because if we don't make that decision for 3 months and then we make the wrong decision, well, we just wasted 3 months.
Yeah, so what advice would you give to a founding team when they are in those early days of selling to their end user or a professional team or league?
You know, I think something that a lot of people talk about is customer feedback and building with the customer as you grow. There's also something that you said, and this probably goes against a lot, but I think I live it. Is you've also got to be an expert in the field, right? And you have to trust that I know the problem I'm trying to solve at the same time because if I take 100 different feedbacks and try to solve the problem for 100 different people, I'm not solving the problem for the 90 of those 100 people that are actually my customer at the end of the day, right? 10 people might be kind of here, this one problem, but you're only solving that one problem for that one person and you need to solve for the 90. And so I think that's something that there's probably this fine line of building with the customer, but at the same time, understanding that you have to be the expert and you have to take complete product ownership and complete go to market ownership and say, this is what the market is looking for based on all this feedback. I understand there's this subset of 10 people that are over here. They're not my customer today, and that's okay. I need to focus on what I'm building for these 90 today so that I can get over that hump, so I can get to the next level. Then we can build those product features out. By the time we've got enough market adoption, all of a sudden, maybe those 10, it's now become 10 in each of those verticals. Now I can build a single siloed product of each of those things along the way that solves a problem greater than just for one person, right? If that makes sense. But in my head, that's how I look at it.
Yeah, yeah. And for somebody who Well, going back, I think it makes a lot of sense that a lot of successful founders in sports are either former athletes or have coached or just have a deep understanding of the industry as a whole. But for somebody who might not have that experience, how do you recommend that they really entrench themselves in the industry and become an expert?
It's a good question. Um, it's it's a challenging one to give you, like, a single answer. Um, I think it I think it takes having lived some of these problems before and, to really understand, like, deeply because I'll use, like, Sideline for an example. It was really hard to explain that to any kind of generalist VC as to what problem we were solving, unless you truly lived it as a coach or an athlete as, like, what that transaction point looked like. So it's very challenging to do that. You know, I think a lot of times people talk about sports that's, start at the bottom and work your way up. If you're truly trying to figure out what problem can I solve and where can I fit myself in that market, don't be afraid to do the dirty work down at the bottom where you're starting to understand some of those problems maybe within a team or within a league, an association, whatever it might be. And you start at the bottom and you can pick up on things that like, hey, we're having a big problem with let's take the CRM for example. Okay, great. Now, what's the problem that we're actually having here? And maybe there's something I can do internally to fix that and help this team with that. And then all of a sudden, if that solves that problem, that one team, I'm willing to bet the odds are high that there's probably other teams, leagues, associations that have those same type of problems, and then you can start there. I would probably say, don't be afraid to play down here. Don't be afraid or too high and mighty, if you will, to be like, hey, I need to go up here to this senior exec level. Just start down here. Start at a basis point. If you don't have the experience, that's cool. One of the beauty points of sports, there's a lot of ways in, and there's a lot of lower end jobs, and there's a lot of internships to be had to be able to just get your foot in the door. Um, I some of the most successful people I know ate shit for a long time, right, before they got there, and that's cool to do.
Like you said, it's just a matter of learning, and especially for a lot of the younger audience, I think that if you're in your 20s and even into your 30s, a lot of the time it's just about understanding the industry and trying to, like you said, get your feet wet. Especially if you have a vision for something that's bigger than what you're currently at.
Yeah, create relationships, right? I mean, everyone has to start somewhere. Not everyone gets to start at X, Y, or Z, right? I can guarantee you I didn't. I kissed a lot of frogs before I, was able to do anything cool. So
Definitely. Well, appreciate all that, Chris. And just one thing that I was talking to Jake about lately is you got back from your family office circuit in Europe. So we'd love to hear first what that was, and what that experience was like, and how did it change or sharpen how you're thinking about the market and the opportunities ahead?
yeah, it was a lot of fun. We did 5 cities in 5 days, and we had lunches with family offices, in those different cities. I just posted about it on LinkedIn. Uh, it was really cool to I've never really spent much time in Europe, especially not with any kind of allocators or anything like that, to understand what the appetite, or especially around sports, talk about our space specifically, is, traditionally the European markets are more conservative and everybody knows that. And that's cool. But I think one of the cool things to just see was the appetite was strong from a lot of those people. And a lot of the folks understood and were very, um, you know, uh, very hungry, I would say, to understand how can and where they're investing in the greater Europe ecosystem, where those products actually have done well, and how do they move them into the US to start gaining more market exposure. Everyone understands that the US sports market is huge and booming. Nobody dismisses that. There's a lot of things happening in Europe, though, that are really, really great. There's a lot of great products that have started in Europe and is starting to move into the US market once they validated with, let's say, soccer, for example, because that's so big there, right? They've done a great job in soccer. Now they have an opportunity to go move to the NFL, the NBA, the MLB. And how do we do that and execute? So it was really cool just from that perspective to see the growing appetite for early stage investing in Europe. That's traditionally known as a very conservative market, but there's a lot of cool stuff happening out of Europe, I would say.
We had somebody recently, Vincent Van Reness, who's the founder of Sports. I don't know if you've ever met Vincent, but he from the Netherlands just recently moved to Westchester, Pennsylvania. So he
Yep.
validated, just like you said, in Europe and is coming over to the States to continue to expand. So exciting times for sure.
Yeah. No, it's cool. I will also not dismiss that there's a lot of stuff in the US product side that can also do a better job in Europe, especially in soccer, and I'll hinge on that because that's a huge market over there, and that market alone might be as big as all of our sports combined over here, just from an attention standpoint. We just happen to do a better job in the US, in my opinion, of monetizing, and so I think there's a really heavy overlap that we need to continue to conquer, for sure.
Yeah, I can't remember the exact figures, but I just remember looking at some graphics about the Premier League and the viewership around some of those games, and then the NFL and even the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
Comparatively, viewership wise, like you said, Premier League is sometimes even bigger than the NFL, but the NFL is making $23 billion a year, so it's hard to compete there.
yeah, no doubt.
So cool. Chris, thank you again for everything. Would love to hear any last words or pieces of advice that you'd like to share with our sports business leaders audience today.
No, and, I think sports is becoming, a true, institutional access, I think there's a lot of institutional money, I think there's a lot of money pouring into it. Uh, I think it's a great thing for our economy itself, just living in our world that if you'd asked me 5 years ago, would sports be this huge investable asset? It just wasn't really on the radar for most people, and now, just the sheer amount of attention that some of the teams are getting, creates a really good ecosystem for a lot of product to be built. There's a lot of space, and I think it's important that people keep trying to build and understand that that money that's going into some of these teams, these overarching huge billion-dollar funds and all the money that's pouring down is gonna start making its way into where do these products start landing,
Mhm.
and there's a lot of room to be built.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Chris, thank you again for being on. What's the best way for everybody to follow along with your journey and keep in touch with you?
Yeah, I think LinkedIn probably I try to post as much as I can there, and I've got my newsletter there that I write a good bit on, so that'd be the best.
Cool. And the website is 51 Ventures.
Dot VC, yeah, yep.
Cool. Awesome.